You all, if you watch the show, you've heard me say that I thought Jeb Bush was one of the most effective leaders that I've ever seen. Actually, the most effective leader I've ever seen in my 25 years in politics and covering politics, in large part because of the way he handled hurricanes and the way he managed natural disasters. We asked him to come on this morning and talk about what the people of Northwest Florida are going through and what we can expect coming up. And Jeb's with us. Governor, thank you so much for being with us. We're honored as always.
Good to be with you, Joe. And those pictures are just incredibly vivid and a reminder of the power of Mother Nature and how we need to be humble as we go about our business to take care of people.
Yeah, could you tell us, Governor, what are so often the eye of the storm hits landfall, goes in to other states, and people think that the danger's over. Actually, that's when some of the danger, some of the other dangers come into play. What do we need to be worried about this morning? What does Florida need to be doing to clean up this morning?
Actually, most deaths occur after the storm has gone by, and it's because people go outside, they think it's over. There may be water, and you may have electric lines that are underneath that water, and people get electrocuted. There's all sorts of things that could happen. And so people just need to be vigilant, listen to their local authorities, and certainly listen to Governor Scott with his his quarterly or 3 or 4 times a day briefings, and then there needs to be, I think people need to just chill out a little bit to allow for the massive numbers of people that are deployed to try to identify people that may be in remote areas to make sure everybody's safe and sound. And then you've got the recovery effort where literally right now there are 1,000 National Guard in our state deployed, millions of gallons of water and ready meals, I think apparently half a million pounds of ice are being deployed to already designated areas. There'll be a lot of assistance coming. The Salvation Army, the Red Cross. We're pretty good at this, and my only hope is that we're in the midst of a campaign season. I think people need to put their arms down and stop the advertising, stop the campaigning, at least in these affected areas, and help their fellow man.
Governor Bush, it's Willie Geist. Appreciate you being on with us this morning. I'm looking at your record as time in the governor's mansion. You had 8 in the span of 14 months, 8 major hurricanes from August of 2004 to October of 2005. We're seeing these more and more even since then with more frequency, more intensity, as Bill Cairns, our meteorologist, has been pointing out this morning. What can we do to be better prepared in terms of infrastructure beyond evacuations and boarding up homes in the days before these storms? What should states like Florida be doing big picture?
Well, Florida did something that was really important when I was governor. The legislature passed the strongest building code in the country, and we ought to constantly be looking at this because you'll see this when cameras get back into these areas. The new building code housing won't be damaged next to places that will be completely destroyed. That'd be the first thing. Secondly, you can't be building in flood zones. That's a lesson I think that the country needs to be serious about. There ought to be, it should be harder to get loans, harder to get insurance for new housing, new construction in places that we know is going to be more damaged. Thirdly, in a state like Florida, it's really hard to evacuate because we now have 22 million people. And the further down the coast it is, it's almost impossible to imagine evacuating. So we need to create even stronger, a stronger supply of shelters to take care of the most vulnerable citizens, the frail elders, people with developmental disabilities. The counties do a good job on that, but I think that always has to be the highest priority because you can't have millions of people on the road. We just don't have the infrastructure to take care of it. And then we need adaptive policies for land use. If there's going to be more storms and more floods, then we have to do what countries like the Netherlands do. You can't, we're not going to go back to wild Florida where there aren't 22 million people. The reason why on those charts that y'all showed in the morning that there's more property damage is there's more property,
Yeah.
it's really a fact that we have this situation, and we need to create adaptive policies over the long haul to deal with them.
All right, Governor Jeb Bush, as always, thank you so much for being on our show. We really do appreciate it. It's great talking to you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.